3PL engagement, a supplier's view. Well, joining us to speak about that is John Wagner, Jr., who's the president of Wagner Industries. John, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Russell.
Well, John, let's talk about the state of engagement between 3PLs and their suppliers. In your view, what is it?
Well, the 3PL world is one that engages customers on a couple of levels. The first level is at the RFP stage, request for proposal, where the company looking to outsource goes to the marketplace and tries to select a provider that can meet their best needs. That's the first part. Second part is then once one is selected, then they contract, they operate, and they remain engaged through the duration of that contract. And so I view engagement on two levels, the preliminary level and then the ongoing level.
You mentioned the RFP process, so let's talk about that. My supposition is you feel that can be improved some kind of way. Am I right? And if so, how so?
Yes, I think it can always be improved. The RFP process is one that is flawed because it views everybody as equal, at least initially. We're working on one now that was sent to a dozen companies, and it's very complex, but yet it lacks a lot of depth into the details of the actual operation. And I just use this as an example of a very large company going out to the marketplace and looking for a service provider. I prefer a different approach, which is rather than going out for proposals, go out for information to look at a dozen companies and then narrow those down to 3 companies in which they can become more intimate with the details, with getting to understand the approach to project planning, getting to know the people that would be actually involved in the execution of the agreement, not just the sales guy, but the actual people who are going to be involved from the information technology level, from the engineering, industrial engineering piece of it, all the way down to the person who's going to have responsibility for the operational execution of that project. And getting to know each other, getting to know each other's culture, just gauging the chemistry is important for a successful partner selection. After all, one wouldn't select one's wife by, throwing a document out and saying, "Okay, I'm going to make my decision based on these answers." I think much more time needs to be given to making sure that this is the organization that you want to partner up with for a term agreement.
You know, you mentioned project planning. I want to follow up on that for just a second or two. Once a project has become operational, what kind of engagement can a shipper expect?
Well, at Wagner, I'm a fan of performance-based agreements where rather than just collecting a fee for doing the work, that there are specific measurable key performance indicators or metrics that are embedded in that agreement that will allow us to stay focused on meeting that customer's requirements for the long haul. And what needs to happen is that you have quarterly review sessions that meet to talk about where we are as measured against that performance-based agreement. And that becomes what you really get together to discuss, as well as any other operational issues. And that's assuming that you've done a really good job on project planning from the beginning, making sure during the startup phase that there are clear, measurable accountability assigned to both parties, because it is a partnership going forward, and we're required to do certain things at specific times, as is the customer. And so having all that delineated up front, it really helps create a seamless startup. And using that performance-based agreement I spoke about, that becomes the ongoing piece that helps you stay focused. Now, at Wagner, one of the things I like to do is approach these agreements at a fairly low margin and have the performance aspect of that and the successful hitting of those KPIs, key performance indicators, having that really provide the profit, if you will, so that the customer is ensured that they're always getting what they want and when they need it, and that we are, in return, getting paid accordingly for delivering on that promise.
I'm glad we're talking about agreements because when we're discussing the nuts and bolts of contracts, there's one very, very important thing in there, and that's the term or the length of the agreement. In your view, what is the appropriate term or length of a contract, or is it just going to always vary?
Well, we live in an age of uncertainty, and people want to make their commitments as short-term as possible. However, the larger and more complex the operation is, and once again, depending on the scope, if this is a shared facility where the business is coming into an existing facility with other customers, then perhaps you can live with that. But what concerns me is when I see very large, complex projects trying to be kept to a very short time level. In my view, a 3 to 7 year term is most appropriate, depending on the complexity of the operation, depending on the investment that the provider is going to have to make for racks. Does the entire facility need to be racked? If we're talking 250, 300,000 square feet, that is a large capital investment. Same thing with any sort of fulfillment capability. If you're having to install conveyor or any sort of automation, pick-to-light systems, that's an enormous capital investment. And it's much more effective to take that cost and amortize it over a length of term, whether that's 5, 7, maybe even longer. If it's a build-to-suit, then you're probably talking 10 years if you're actually going out and building a building. But to have that level of commitment, it really helps make everybody whole. The other thing that concerns me in many of these long-term agreements is a cancellation clause, where the agreement can be canceled on 30 days written notice. And in my view, that's not a 5-year agreement now; it's a 30-day agreement. Now, if you're going to have a cancellation clause, it should be written for lack of performance, and there should be language in there, an escalation process to cure that problem if one should arise. But by and large, I think term is a good thing because it allows the 3PL to invest in the operation with confidence that they're going to see a return on that capital.
The other day you and I were speaking, and you mentioned something very interesting. You used a term called customer intimacy. Briefly, if you would, just elaborate on that for the viewer. What do you mean by that?
Well, customer intimacy, in my view, means an openness of sharing of information, getting to really know each other, getting to know each other on several levels, senior executive to senior executive, down to the mid-level managers who are involved in the day-to-day operations of this particular facility. And that sharing of information, that open communication, even to the extent of sitting down at the same table and talking about the next 3 months. What order surges are in the queue? Are there any promotions coming up that are going to cause our business to spike? And having that free flow of communication that allows the service provider to adequately plan for labor, make sure that they have adequate handling equipment available, to make sure that carriers are lined up to handle any surge. There's lots of planning that needs to take place. In our best customer arrangements, they tend to be more strategic than tactical. And the company is utilizing our services really very closely, and when we're all sitting around a table, you would really have a hard time as an outsider picking out who works for who, because we're all focused on the same goals. And that's what I mean by intimacy, is just open, honest communication.
Final question, briefly. What else is necessary for the successful engagement that you've been talking about?
I would say it's that open and honest communication that's so critical. Getting to know everybody's strengths, any possible weaknesses, and just really an openness that comes from working in a truly collaborative manner. And secondly, I would say that it's a belief on both parts that there has to be a balance between the needs of the customer and the needs of the 3PL. That it's in the customer's best interest if the 3PL is financially strong and thriving and not being ground to powder by continual rate pressure to go down. Not that people should be expecting rate increases, but there should be a collaborative climate that exists where people are talking about the issues, the various cost factors that drive costs up, and what can we do together to keep those down? Is it end-of-month order surge that is caused perhaps by a sales commission structure, then it's just unintended consequences? Well, if you have that open communication going on, then the service provider can tell the customer what that's costing them to structure it that way, because you're having to bring in, 30 people at the end of the month and ramp up costs so that you can provide the service that's required. So I would say just open, honest communication and having customers that and a 3PL provider that have everybody's best interests at heart. And that's the key to a good relationship and a quality engagement.
Collaboration, much talked about, so let's start practicing it a little bit more. John, I want to thank you very much for sitting down and meeting with us today.
Well, thank you, Russell.
That's John Wagner, Jr., Wagner Industries, and speaking with us today about 3PL engagement, a supplier's view. Well, thank you for watching.